So I'm going to go through it. And what I did was I wrote it down because there's a lot that they try to help him with. And again, if people are listening to this and staying tuned for all of this, this has to do with healing. This has to do with going into things with a different attitude, with a different intention.
I feel like people who have been listening for 4 or 5 years are like, yeah, Karen, we know.
Yes, I'm glad they do. But for all of the people that are brand new, and this is their very first podcast, and they're just clicking into it, and they think, what? Healing? I thought these two were mediums. I thought they were psychics. What the hell is happening here? Not everybody understands. We have all these licenses in energy healing. We have psychology background for you in university, life coaching skills and certificate. There's so much more here. Okay, so I'm gonna jump right in. So the very first place they started, and this was a little bit all over the map, so people are going to think, geez, Karen, why didn't you get your show more organized?
She has numbers.
I do.
She's as organized as she can be.
Yes, because I'm also trying to stick to the way that his session went, and it isn't all super neatly organized, but the guides did it in the way they wanted to for him. And so I'm trying to still hold on to the integrity of that session for our listeners. Okay, so the very first thing they said was, why don't you call your mom? She's still alive. And he was like, well, I do rarely, like once a year, Mother's Day, maybe Christmas, that kind of thing. And it stays on a very superficial level, which is fine for him. But the guide said, why don't you sit down and get into a space to call her about being curious about where she was at and where your dad was at when you were a child. Why don't you listen to her story? And he was like, listen to her story. I already know it. She had this many kids. She did this. She ran this business. And he kind of like attacked the guide's back, which is what he does. So I said, Kevin, could you just shut up? And he looked at me, was like, what? And I said, well, could you just listen? And I said, I'm saying shut up because it's harsh. And I said, it's not a term I would like to say to you. And it's not how I talk as Karen personally. But the guides are standing there saying, that's enough. That's enough. Every time somebody tries to help you, you come back with attacks. You don't respect anybody unless they're as harsh as you. And he went, wow. And I said, so they came in and did something to you that you do to everybody else. Your mom could be kind and nice to you. A sibling could be kind and nice to you. A doctor could be now, but you still attack. You haven't dropped your attack mode in, 50 years. Aren't you tired? And so he sat there and went, yeah, I'm fatigued. And I said, aren't you full of body pain? I am. I said, hasn't the body pain fatigued you so that you can just sit and be a better listener? And he goes, apparently not. So I said, well, the guides are asking you to listen to your mom and to ask her questions and just to listen. So as far as what the guides are saying currently today, your mom would like to explain what it's like to have that many children and that many businesses, and how they were also dealing with other children with learning disabilities. They were dealing with children with medical issues, with their own parents, with their own siblings, where they both had big families. There was so much on their plate, they were overwhelmed. And so they were literally trying their hardest to actually get you to the psychiatrist. They were trying their best to get you to the medical doctors. They even drove to other cities to get you help, instead of just in your local city where it was a small community, and they thought, let's take him to a bigger center to see if the other doctors might have more information. And he went, well, that's true. They did take me down to these bigger cities. They did. And I said, they even packed you up in the vehicle with all your siblings, all of you. And he went, that's true, they did. And I said, your mom might have information to help you explain that at that time and with the resources that they had and their own level of education that they actually did extraordinary means. And he said, I've never heard the word extraordinary in reference to anybody making an effort for me. And I said, well, that's because you've never wanted to see it that way so that you could stay in your anger. And he says, and you're telling me today that my parents did extraordinary things to help me. And I said, yeah, I'm going to list them. And he was like, oh. So I literally listed the things that they did and how they even had to shelve what was going on in their career to get to those meetings. They had to put aside what was happening with their own parents and pick a child over a parent. They had to pick one child over another child. Oh. And how hard it is to pick a child over another one. And that they sat there and said, okay, we did it in this instance and we feel terrible because the other child, we couldn't do this for the other kids. We did this for him because we prioritized that he needed that and he had waited his turn. And now we will go back to the other children and we'll reprioritize and keep going. But it was constant reprioritizing crises for decades. And I said, do you know that? And he goes, no. And he goes, but I didn't stick around. He says, I left. And I said, that's right. And even when you left, they kept trying to prioritize their finances to help you. So even if they knew certain children needed braces, they waited another year for the braces because the dentist said, yeah, we can do it in a year. But in the meantime, we have to send him rent because he literally won't have a roof over his head. So the braces will have to wait for 2 years or 4 years. And that child had to go through being ridiculed because of their teeth. And I said, so you've got brothers and sisters who went through and have their own stories of pain, their own disappointments, their own anger with their parents about why didn't I get my braces? And they're mad at their mom and dad like you are.